Chelsea's 2-1 win over Lincoln City in the Carabao Cup might look, at first glance, like nothing more than routine business. A Premier League giant brushing aside a third-tier side. With the fixture list packed and rotation inevitable, most expected a game where the favorites managed their energy more than put on a show. But even on nights like this, there's a baseline expectation. Play well enough to reassure your fans. And somehow, Chelsea couldn't even do that for 45 minutes. Against Lincoln, it was the underdogs who struck first, and for long stretches of the opening half, it was Chelsea who looked second best. The numbers were damning. An expected goals tally of just 0.37 for a squad worth £367 million, backed up by a bench that cost another £240 million. By contrast, Lincoln's record signing, midfielder Ivan Varfolomiev, cost just £350,000. And yet, his team managed to rattle Chelsea with direct play, long throws, and set pieces that exposed the Blues' defensive frailties. Afterward, Enzo Maresca admitted as much. I asked today how many of them had played against a League One team, because you need to play a different kind of game. It's not the same game because the desire is double from them. We struggled in the first half. In the second half, we were much better. What really worries Chelsea supporters, though, is the sense of déjà vu. The same weaknesses that surfaced against Lincoln have been on display in the Premier League, too. Think back to the 2-2 draw with Brentford or the goalless stalemate with Crystal Palace, matches where Chelsea lost control whenever the opposition deployed a big, physical striker to suffocate their deep-lying midfielder. Lincoln's Freddie Draper did that job to perfection, sticking tight to Andre Santos whenever Chelsea tried to build from the back. The young Brazilian found himself repeatedly shut down, unable to move the ball upfield. With their midfield axis choked off, Chelsea were forced to rely on individual movement from Facundo Buonanotte, Enzo Fernandez, or Malo Gusto. But Lincoln's defenders pressed aggressively and closed them down the moment the ball arrived. A third-tier side executed a simple tactical plan, and it was enough to leave Chelsea looking short of ideas. That alone raises big questions about Maresca's preparation. The pattern has become clear. Against Brentford, it was Igor Thiago playing the Draper role, sticking to Moises Caicedo and cutting off Chelsea's supply line from deep. The result? Another game where the Blues dropped points, undone by a late equalizer. After the Lincoln match, Maresca himself admitted he'd been worried about long balls and set pieces even before kickoff. In other words, the coaching staff knew exactly what was coming, yet for the first 45 minutes they still couldn't stop it. Part of that stems from the inexperience in Chelsea's young lineup. Players like Facundo Buonanotte and Jorel Hato in that Lincoln game were almost too disciplined, glued to their positions, lacking the fluidity needed to stretch the opposition. That rigidity made Chelsea's play predictable, while the defense was repeatedly pinned back by aerial duels and dead ball deliveries. The moment Pedro Neto stepped onto the pitch, the picture changed dramatically. He's one of the rare Chelsea players who can carve out space for himself in crowded defensive blocks. Marc Cucurella, too, was influential. His ability to invert or drift wide gave Chelsea's shape a much-needed flexibility. But here lies the concern. If the team has to lean so heavily on just a couple of individuals, what happens when they're missing? Suddenly, the entire system looks shaky, both in defense and attack. Against Lincoln, Maresca's eventual solution was to take a risk. He pushed more players into midfield, asking Gusto and Hato to join the build-up and leaving only two center-backs at the back. That shift threw Lincoln off balance. Draper could no longer simply man-mark Santos, forcing support to come from midfield. With that, Chelsea found the spaces they needed and eventually turned the game around. But here's the bigger question. What happens when the opponent isn't Lincoln, but a Premier League side with more quality, sharper pressing, and greater intensity? Does that gamble still pay off, or does it backfire? It's hard to say, but the growing unease feels justified when you start digging into the numbers. Defensive frailties are only half the story. Chelsea's struggles in attack are just as glaring. Take the goalless draw with Crystal Palace. Yes, they kept a clean sheet, but their goal was constantly under threat from high balls into the box. Brentford went one better, ruthlessly exploiting the space behind a high defensive line to score from rapid transitions. Even Lincoln, the so-called minnows, repeatedly unsettled the Blues with long throws and set pieces. When these scenarios repeat time and time again, it's no longer coincidence. It's a systemic flaw, one so clear that even a third-tier side is actively targeting it to checkmate Maresca. Another solution, at least in theory, is to stretch defenses with runs in behind. With Liam Delap, Chelsea once had that outlet, a powerful center forward who thrived on attacking open spaces and constantly forced defenders into awkward positions. But Delap is now sidelined with a long-term injury, and no one else has stepped into that role. João Pedro prefers to receive the ball to feet rather than make penetrative runs. Against Lincoln, Tariq George was completely neutralized by their center-backs. Without a direct, bulldozing striker, Chelsea lacked that vertical threat, leaving their build-up play congested and easy to contain. In the bigger picture, this is a strategic risk. Cole Palmer, still recovering from injury, isn't yet available to carry the creative burden, week in, week out. Meanwhile, the new signings are still adapting to Maresca's system. That makes Chelsea predictable. Block the pass into the holding midfielder, usually Caicedo or Santos, and the entire structure collapses. Fulham showed how effective this approach can be. They pressed high, marked aggressively in Chelsea's own half, and denied them even the simplest solutions. In other words, Chelsea have become overly dependent on one fixed pattern of play. And when that single pass is cut off, the whole team grinds to a halt. The predictability in Chelsea's approach has made their matches against Brentford, Palace, and now Lincoln feel eerily familiar. They dominate possession but without creating real separation, all while leaving gaping holes behind them. The irony? Outside of Liverpool, Arsenal, and Manchester City, the rest of the Premier League hasn't been especially convincing this season. On paper, that should have opened the door for Chelsea to climb into the top four, almost by default. Instead, the target feels as elusive as ever. At a moment when they should be surging forward, the mood is that they're slipping backward, whether by a little or a lot. Right now, the only real hope lies in the return of key players. With Palmer and Delap fit, Chelsea would regain creativity and a direct attacking threat. With Levi Colwill healthy, opponents would find it harder to man-mark Chelsea out of games. In other words, just a few missing pieces coming back could patch the system's glaring weaknesses. But that in itself is the problem. A squad this expensive shouldn't crumble just because a handful of players are sidelined. It's proof that the balance of the roster isn't there yet. Maresca is known for treating football like chess, tinkering with structures, adjusting roles, reshuffling pieces in response to the game. But when the solution is constantly to gamble, to push more bodies forward or reassign players just to plug gaps, that's not sustainable. Chelsea need more than band-aids. They need solidity between the posts, stability at center-back, a midfield with enough experience, and a striker who can stretch defenses. Beating Lincoln may have stopped the bleeding after 2 defeats and a draw, but it doesn't erase the deeper concerns. If even mid-table sides, or worse, League One opponents, can repeatedly exploit the same defensive frailties, then Chelsea's problems are systemic, not circumstantial. And for a club that wears the badge of world champions, allowing the same weakness to be punished again and again is not just concerning, it's unacceptable.